It is Selection Sunday. Welcome to Road to the Final Score, presented by bet365. My name is Marino. I'm here with Anthony Dabbundo and Mike Calabrese. Also joining us via Zoom is Stuckey. We are streaming on the Action app and the Action Network YouTube channel. First of all, guys, it's good to have you here in studio. Stuck, good to work with you as well for the very first time. Nick Giffen is going to join us momentarily for some analytics. We are reacting to the NCAA tournament men's bracket. The selections were just made. We're going to break down each region one by one. We're going to share some Cinderella picks as well. So buckle up, everybody. We have got quite the show ahead. And Bet365 is offering a bracket challenge where customers will play for points in each round, and the overall winner will get $100,000. Anyone who predicts a perfect bracket will win $10 million. So head to actionnetwork.com/bracket to enter. That sounds pretty sweet, I think. But let's tip things off with just immediate reaction to the bracket. Anthony, you get to go first. Give me something that stood out to you.
Well, as somebody who has a UConn future that I placed a couple weeks ago, I am not feeling nearly as good about it anymore because the West might be the best region I've ever seen. Bart Torvik actually tweeted this. He runs a popular analytics website. He has Kansas, who is the #1 seed in that region, as the 5th best team in the region based on his numbers, power ratings. Arkansas is the 8th seed. They're arguably a top 20, 25 team. TCU, I know Stuckey is very high on TCU, and we don't know how healthy they'll be, but they're a very dangerous 6. Gonzaga's been playing better than anybody the last month. They're a 3. UConn is a top 5 team in some metrics. They're a 4, and so this region is absolutely loaded from top to bottom. And I didn't even mention UCLA at the bottom of the bracket. We don't know their injury situation either, but they're also projected as a top 5 team. So, I mean, the West is incredible, and trying to figure out who's going to come out of that region is going to be really difficult, especially when you look across the way at the East, which I know Stuck is about to talk about. It's one of the weakest regions that I could have possibly drawn up.
All right, Stuck, tell us about that. Why do you think this is the weakest region?
Yeah, I mean, I echo Anthony's sentiments completely. I mean, just to finish his off on the West, Arkansas, with 3 potential first-round draft picks, they have a ton of talent, right? St. Mary's, by some metrics, top 10, 15 team. They're a 5 seed. That region is absolutely loaded, and TCU dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the season, so I think they're underseeded. When they're fully healthy, with their guards, their ability to defend as a 6 seed, that's insane. And then on the other side of the token, you go and you look at what I call the least region. It is completely wide open. I think there's a bunch of teams that are overseeded. You have Kansas State as a 3, Tennessee, but they lost one of their most important players in Ziegler, and he's out for the season. Marquette, you could argue, is a vulnerable 2. And then Purdue, they're vulnerable. And Zach Edey is the rightful player of the year, but they have some young guards, and they might have to face Memphis in the second round. And what I think makes this region even weaker is that FAU and Memphis, who are 2 scary teams, they're matched up together in the first round. So one of those teams is walking out the door. So yeah, the least region, especially compared to the West, it looks just a lot softer, and the path to the Final Four looks a lot easier for some of those teams. But as we all know, it doesn't usually play out that way. I'm sure there'll be chaos everywhere.
Yes, chaos is what we would like to see, right, Breeze?
Yes, I'm going to keep on that theme of maybe not so much positivity. Basically, when people have been asking me the last couple of weeks about this college basketball season, the question has been, where are the good teams? Why isn't anyone risen to the top? And at this point, as soon as the bracket came out, what I wanted to know was, who are the teams that are in a vulnerable position from a matchup perspective? And Virginia is the top of my list. And that's usually how I start to build my bracket. Some people like to go with their champion, their Final Four first. I want to go ahead and circle those 2 to 3 upsets and build around that. And when you look at the Cavaliers, they've been leaking oil offensively down the stretch. 8 of their last 11 games, they failed to score 65 points. And they're up against a Paladins team that's not only a great story, but they're also a great shooting team. 10th in shooting efficiency nationally, 1st inside of the 3-point arc. And they're up against this Virginia defense, yes, the famed pack line defense, but they're going to play 5 out a lot. So that's a matchup that I think really is in the favor of the Dins. And that's what gets me excited about this bracket. Let's just start in the round of 64. We don't have to talk too deeply right off the top, but I love a good upset, and I think this is the way to start it.
All right, so you're talking about Virginia potentially getting upset. They are in the South region, and let's talk more about the South region right now as we start to go through our specific regions. Alabama is the top overall seed in the South. Arizona is a 2 seed. Dabbundo, what else stood out to you about this this region of the bracket?
So I'm excited about the South because 2 of my favorite and most, I thought, underseeded teams ended up in this region. Creighton as the 6, Utah State as the 10. 2 teams that I was very high on coming into the season and had, in the conference tournament, I bet them as well. I think Utah State gets a really, really good matchup in the first round with Missouri. That's the first game that jumped off the board to me when they were going through the bracket. Missouri's defense was one of the worst in the country against shooters. They were 5th worst in terms of percentage of catch and shoot jumpers that were unguarded. And that was in the SEC where nobody was able to shoot this year except Missouri. And so they were able to benefit from that. They played nobody out of conference. The only team they played that was worth anything out of conference was Kansas, who scored 95 points on them. And if you haven't seen Utah State play, this is the same coach, Ryan Odom, who coached UMBC in 2016. They run a ton of great off-ball action. They are one of the best shooting teams in the country. They have 4 guys that make 40% of their threes. So if they're going to get Missouri's defense, which guards nobody, I think it's a really favorable matchup for the Aggies. And then they could get Arizona in the second round. I worry about them guarding the rim, but they can also cause matchup problems by spacing the floor. Going 4 out against Arizona and making Tubelis and Ballo guard the perimeter, which I don't know that they can do. So I think the Aggies are live. And I actually consulted with Jim Root, Missouri expert, and his text to me was, I hope that the elite shooting team happens to be cold. So he's not that fond of the matchup, I don't think. But yes, it will be an interesting first-round matchup, and that's the first one that jumped out to me.
Well, meanwhile, Stuck, I think this Virginia matchup also stood out to you, as it did with Calabrese. What were your thoughts on that Virginia-Furman matchup?
Yeah, Anthony, and I do agree with you as well. 2 teams that want to shoot a ton of threes in that Missouri game. Utah State does a much better job of running teams off the three-point line. Missouri will also zone you, throw out a press. Utah State, per synergy, is elite against both. So I do like that matchup. For Utah State, just got to hope that a Mountain West team, they haven't won a tournament game since 2018. But I really do like the matchup there. And yeah, I agree with Mike as well, who already brought this up. Furman, I think, is a really good matchup for Virginia with that 5-out offense. Now, they want to get out and run, which Virginia won't let you do. So Furman won't get out in transition here. But they're very comfortable in the half court. Their half court offense is excellent. They have a number of shooters, which you need against Virginia. And look, I'm comfortable fading the ACC. I think it was just a really down year. And Virginia's offense is just very limited. And they lost Vanderplas. You have Shedrick in there now. So their defense is a little better, but their offense is more limited, which is key because that's Furman's weakness, is defending. Also, I think this game's going to be slower. Virginia grinds games down, lower possessions, which makes the underdog even more intriguing. So, yeah, I agree with Mike here. I think this is a good matchup for Furman. Very experienced team, great story, and I think this game should go down to the wire.
Breeze over here nodding your head. What other matchups should I say, caught your eye in that region?
Well, I appreciate, Anthony, that you let me have a shot at Creighton. It's a Creighton love affair here in the studio, and while it should be, they are one of the few teams in the entire field that are top 30 in offensive and defensive efficiency, according to KenPom, and that gets into that magic DNA of what is a champion. So when I look at their road, not only do I like them laying 4.5 against NC State, I think the projected path of them playing NC State, Baylor, and Arizona, those are 3 teams that they can beat, and I absolutely think that they have the balance from Kalkbrenner on low block to their guards that they absolutely love. I mean, I got excited in the transfer portal when they got Shireman. Now it's finally coming to fruition. They were able to beat some good teams down the stretch in the Big East, and that's another element that I do think gets talked about a great deal that isn't overstated, which is, did he play in the Big 12? Did he play in the Big East where you tested on a weekly basis? And Creighton is one of those teams up against an NC State team that arguably hasn't had a whole lot of hasn't strung together a lot of impressive wins in the past month. When you look at their last 6, Florida State, Georgia Tech, BC, UNC, Wake, Tech, that doesn't move the needle for me. So I think they're going to be out of their depth, in the deep end of the pool against Creighton here in the first round. So I have no problem laying the 4.5.
NC State did beat a single tournament team, except when they were on their home floor. So no neutral or away wins against any tournament teams. I was surprised they weren't in Dayton. That was really surprising to me, and Rutgers getting left out. I thought they got snubbed. I would have taken Rutgers over NC State. But the NC State will be an interesting matchup. DJ Burns and Kalkbrenner, which will be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, NC State also presses as much as any team in the country, about a third of the time, and Creighton is an elite press offense. You can't press them, which works in Creighton's favor as well.
Okay, so a bunch of great matchups to look out for there in the South. Let's turn our attention to the Midwest. That's where Houston is the 1 seed. They are 2nd overall. Texas is the 2 seed. And Stuckey, we're going to start with you here. What's a matchup that you have circled?
Yeah, let's look at Penn State. I think this is a really good matchup against Texas A&M for a number of reasons. Penn State, what are some of the things that they do well? They could shoot the three. They shoot the three at a top 10 rate and at a top 10%. So that's what you need to do against Texas A&M. They underscreen, they're aggressive. You have to move the ball and make threes. How does Texas A&M score? Well, they force turnovers. They get to the line. They crash the offensive boards. Well, Penn State, great on the defensive glass. They never foul, and they don't turn it over. Penn State, a 10 seed again. They just had a great run and some magic in the Big Ten tournament. I think this team is primed for a mini upset here. And they have a great coach, great X's and O's coach, who I think will have them ready here. But yeah, at Texas A&M, look, they're great. They're going to play hard, but they give up a ton of threes. And that worked in the SEC where you had a lot of teams that couldn't shoot the three. That's not the case here. I like this matchup for Penn State.
All right, and as we take it back in-house here, Anthony, I believe you are in agreement with Stuckey.
To an extent. I'm a little worried about the market getting a little too hot on Penn State. You know, I hate the team that goes on the huge conference tournament run and then everybody gets on the bandwagon and starts to back them. I mean, this is what Iowa did last year. A team that has some flaws. A&M is much more physical inside, so that is a question mark for Penn State. I mean, everybody's more physical inside than Penn State. But this region, I think, is the chalkiest. When you look at, I'm pretty high on both the 1 and the 2 seed at the top. And I think they have pretty favorable paths to get through. Iowa and Auburn in the second round potentially for Houston. Assuming Sasser's good to go, Iowa really can't match up physically. Auburn turns the ball over a lot. Their guards are inconsistent, and they haven't been very good away from home either. I think they're flawed. You look at the bottom of the bracket. Penn State probably can't match up with Texas, and Xavier and Iowa State is going to be the little section of the bracket that I'm most stumped by when I'm filling out mine because I don't really love either of those teams. Kennesaw State's intriguing as a 14, catching the points, but it's a really tricky region. But I think ultimately it ends up being the chalkiest just because of how the bracket broke for the 2 favorites.
What game do you see being an interesting matchup here, Breeze?
So this is an important time of year to know your personnel. And when it comes to the Miami Hurricanes as a 5 seed, their best rebounder, Norchad Omier, is going to be questionable coming in with an ankle injury. So whether he plays at a limited capacity or he sits, that's a huge impact for a Hurricanes team that relies on him to not only be someone who's a stat sheet stuffer, but he's also that energizer bunny for them. So when their shots aren't falling, they're getting extra possessions and extra opportunities. They're going up against a mid-major who can really rebound. Drake finished 2nd nationally in defensive rebounding percentage. So they do it as a team. They're not relying on a single player. And then when you look at their backcourt, do they have the punch to get over the top against the Canes? I think they do. Tucker DeVries and Roman Penn are really nice from a duo perspective. So the fact that this number opened at 3.5, I think is an indication that Vegas is taking them very seriously to win outright.
All right, Calabrese maybe taking Drake to cover against Miami. And so, look, we already got 2 regions down. We have 2 to go, so we'll get to the West and East a little bit more in depth in a few. But first, I want to remind you that you're invited to watch the Elite 8 with the Action Network crew. I'll be there. Stuckey will be there. Will you guys be there?
I'll be there.
Fantastic. We're hosting a Madness watch party presented by Bet365 at the Mad Hatter in Hoboken, New Jersey, my stomping grounds, on March 25th. So go to actionnetwork.com to RSVP. Now for a deep dive into all the numbers that will help you fill out your NCAA tournament men's bracket, we bring in our predictive analyst, Nick Giffen. And Nick, what can you tell us about any teams that may be over or underseeded in the bracket?
Yeah, well, let's start with the overseeded teams. And I have to be fair, I have to be impartial. My Virginia Cavaliers are the most overseeded team. They shouldn't be a 4 seed. They should be an 8 seed. I have them about 31st in my power rankings of the 68 teams that made the bracket. Additionally, Miami, also an ACC team. You know, a lot of this is based off win-loss record, and the ACC certainly wasn't a down year, but somebody has to win in the ACC. That's why Virginia and Miami are overrated. Then I also have Missouri overrated. They are a 7 seed, but they actually should be in the middle of the pack, an 11 seed, just based off predictive metrics like power ratings. So I think that's an interesting one there. On the other side, underseeded teams, well, if we go a state over from Virginia, West Virginia is the most underseeded team. They actually should be 4 seeds higher. I have them as about the 20th best team in this tournament. And then right after them, there's a 4-way tie at teams that are 3 seeds lower than they should be. That includes Utah State and Auburn. I'm going to talk about 2 of the other teams later, so I do want to highlight Utah State and Auburn as 2 of the underseeded teams here. And very notably, I mentioned Missouri's overseeded, and I mentioned Utah State is underseeded. Well, they play each other in that 7-10 game. I actually have the 10 seed, Utah State, favored by nearly 3 points in this game at a neutral site over Missouri. So just thought that was a pretty interesting fact there.
Very cool, a potential upset alert. Now, Nick, as you look at the bracket as a whole, what in your estimation is the toughest region to play in?
Yeah, I have the West region as very clearly the toughest region. Of the 16 teams, you know, these teams average 31.6% better than an average NCAA team. And of course, all these teams are better than an average NCAA team. That's why they're in the tournament. But of all of them, this is the highest 31.6% better than an average team. And that's because this region has the best 2 seed, the best 3 seed, the best 4 seed, the best 5 seed, and the best 8 seed in my power ratings. And then flipping over to the easiest region, that is the East region with Purdue. Not only is Purdue the worst 1 seed, but I also have the worst 2 and 3 seeds in this region. The 3 seed just barely, but so worst 1, 2, and 3, and that means the average team is only 29.5% better than the average NCAA team compared to that 31.6 in Kansas's West region there.
Wow, so Kansas is trying to repeat, but you just said that the West is looking like the toughest region. Does that mean Kansas has the toughest path of the 1 seeds to win it all?
Yeah, that does. And just because they're the toughest region doesn't necessarily mean that, but in this case it does. And that's because if you remember what I listed, the hardest 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8 seeds. Well, I didn't list Kansas as the hardest 1 seed. So they get the short end of the stick here. Their weighted path difficulty, which is weighted by the probability I have of each team advancing and then their power rating of the teams they'll face, is 21.7% harder than an average NCAA team each game. And that's because, having the best 4, 5, and 8 seed all in the same half of the bracket is absolutely brutal for Kansas. And even if they somehow survive that gauntlet, right, of getting past the 8-9 game and then of getting past the 8 seed potentially, and then they would have to play the hardest 4 or the hardest 5 seed, and that is Connecticut as the most difficult 4 seed in that region, and then the most difficult 5 seed in that region is St. Mary's. So no, those are in Arkansas. That 8 seed is another one of those underrated, underseeded teams. So Connecticut and Arkansas are the 2 other teams that were most underseeded here. So Kansas just a really tough path. On the flip side, the easiest path is not actually Purdue, and that's because they're a weak 1 seed. So even though they have a weak rest of region as well, Houston ends up having the easiest path because they are the best team in my power ratings. So that takes away a lot of the difficulty of that region is because they don't have to play themselves. So their weighted path difficulty is 19.5% better than an average NCAA team compared to that 21.7% for Kansas. They get the easiest 8-9 game should they beat the 16 team, and they will. And then Miami is the weakest 5 seed. Indiana is a relatively weak 4 seed. So they have a really nice 8-9, 4-5 setup here. And then on the other side, Xavier and Iowa State are not particularly strong 3 and 6 seeds as well. So if 2 seed Texas there was to get upset, Xavier or Iowa State certainly is in a good spot here. I'm sorry, Houston's in a good spot to face Xavier or Iowa State. Getting all my regions confused because we're just coming fresh off the bracket.
Yeah, gotcha. First of all, props to you for just amazing quick reaction with incredible insight. But finally, Nick, where do you see the best path for a potential Cinderella run?
Yeah, so first we'll start with teams that are seated in the bottom half. So instead of 1 to 8, let's go 9 to 16. I'll start with 9 to 11 because we all like that 12 or plus longer. But in that 9 to 11 range, Mississippi State, if they get out of their play-in game, they set up really well in their spot because they get that week Iowa State Xavier 3-6 that I talked about there. So I think they're really set up to make a run even from the play-in game. If they somehow lose their play-in game, then I would go to a different 11 seed, and I would say Providence has the best Cinderella run of a 9 to 11 seed there. As far as 12 or longer, I'm going to stick with the 12 and the 13 seeds in the same quarter of the bracket, and that is Drake and Kent State. Drake, the 12 seed, and Kent State, the 13 seed, just attacking that weak Miami, Indiana quarter of the bracket. I could see, Drake beating Miami. I could see Kent State beating Indiana, and then they could potentially face each other for a spot in the Sweet 16 there. So I really like that region. I definitely have that as the better 12-13 than the Virginia side, which also has San Diego State. And that's because San Diego State is a little bit tougher of a 5 seed there. So I do think while the Virginia side is easy for Furman, the San Diego State side is a little bit tougher there for Charleston. So I just barely have the 12-13 on Drake and Kent State over the Virginia and San Diego State sides 12 and 13.
You heard him, Nick Giffen. So fascinating. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, no problem. And enjoy March Madness.
I will. Back here with the rest of our crew as we look at the West region, and everyone here on this panel seems to agree this is probably the toughest region. Kansas is the 1 seed, 3rd overall, while UCLA is the number 2 seed. And Anthony, you still rolling with UConn?
I'm going down with the ship on the Huskies. Look, I know they lost Friday night to Marquette, but shot quality graded that as a win. They had a ton of open threes down the stretch, couldn't get any to fall. I think their combination of athleticism, depth, and then rim protection with Sanogo and Klingon, I think they're as good as anybody in the country. And since February 12th, they're playing as a top 5 team per Bart Torvik. So they're playing as well as anybody. And I actually don't think that getting out of their little quadrant is going to be that difficult. I think VCU has a real chance to beat St. Mary's with their pressure. We saw BYU and Gonzaga go 3-quarter, full court and really bother St. Mary's and slow them down and make their offense harder to work. And I think VCU can do some of the same things. So I think they may pull an upset there. And then, it gets a little easier for UConn. I would rather be on the top half trying to make a run against Kansas than against Gonzaga, TCU, and UCLA. So that's why I'm still have a glimmer of hope from my Huskies, but it's definitely not as friendly as if they were in the East, being in the region of death.
Okay. Well, let's turn back over to Stuckey. What is the matchup that you're looking at here in the West?
Yeah, let's go with another Mountain West team. I'm setting myself up for failure here. Boise State against Northwestern. Northwestern had a hell of a year, but I think this is a really tough matchup for them. Their defense during Big Ten play was great defending the post, and that matters in the Big Ten because you're dealing with a lot of great post players. Doesn't really matter here against Boise State, who doesn't really run their offense through the post, and that's one of Boise State's weaknesses on defense is their post defense, and on the other side of the ball, Northwestern doesn't really have a great post offense. I think the versatility of Boise State's lineup on both ends can give Northwestern issues. They also have the shooters to take advantage of that Northwestern defense. So I think that this is a really tough matchup for Northwestern. Boise State, I think, also thrives in the half court, and they don't have a lot of depth. So I think a slower, lower scoring game benefits them here, which this should be. So yeah, I like Boise State against Northwestern. I think Northwestern was more built to thrive during Big Ten play based on some of the matchups and how those teams were built. And this will be a little tougher matchup. So right around a pick, I like Boise State here.
I was hoping to fade both teams in the bracket personally, and so unfortunately I can't.
You can bet both, and then just juice out.
And then juice out, yeah. So whoever wins this game will get UCLA in round 2. That's probably going to be a bet against. But yeah, I'm out on Boise in the Mountain West, but I'm also even more out on the Northwestern. Betting against the Big Ten and the Mountain West generally profitable in March the last few years. There's some Midwest teams I like. I mentioned Utah State, but not buying either of those teams personally.
Mike Calabrese, what are you looking at in this West region?
I will share your enthusiasm for fading teams. I'm going to have to wait one round to fade the Jayhawks. Not going to call for that 16-1 upset. But in my opinion, when you look at their advanced metrics, particularly through the lens of them being a 1 seed, they struggle on the glass. They're not very good from 3-point range. And they didn't break 70 points in 4 of their last 7 games. I think that really gives them a vulnerability in the second round. Whether they catch an Illinois team that is great defensively and scoring at the basket, or an Arkansas team that, in my opinion, they're just totally different with Nick Smith Jr. reinserted into the lineup. When you get a lottery pick back, who not only is back off of injury, but he could have shut things down and said, I'm going to set up for the NBA draft and making millions. Instead, he came back and almost orchestrated an upset of Alabama on the road in Tuscaloosa. To me, that illustrates their ceiling, and I think Kansas is really going to have their hands full. I'm not going to be surprised if the Jayhawks are knocked out before the end of the first weekend.
That's another common thread here with our analysts. It's going to be a tough road for Kansas to repeat this year. Now let's go over to the East, which Stuckey has dubbed the least region here in our bracket. Purdue is the number 1 seed. They're 4th overall, and Marquette is the 2 seed. Anthony, what else stands out to you about this region?
Well, I haven't seen what the talking heads are saying yet, but I'm guessing that the entire world will be joining a bunch of us on Memphis against Purdue in the second round if that matchup does happen. FAU can cause some problems for Purdue as well. I think, Purdue is certainly the most vulnerable 1 seed overall. I think, maybe some of us on Twitter and in sports media get a little bit too carried away. Purdue did, win the Big East regular season and won the the Big Ten championship, beat the Big East champion, beat the ACC champion in the non-conference. So they have, put together a pretty impressive resume. Put some respect on Purdue's name for what they did, even though I know everybody in the media thinks they're fraudulent. But I think Montana State can match up well with Kansas State. This is the region where I think the top seeds could, face some scares. UC Santa Barbara, I think, matches up pretty well with Baylor. They can slow the game down. They can go score for score with them. They can expose Baylor inside where Baylor can't really score or can't defend. And Montana State has elite forwards where K-State's pretty small. So I think this is the region where if you're looking for some against the spread or even money line long shots, I think you're going to want to target the top seeds in the East.
Stuckey, what say you?
Yeah, we got to stop talking about this Memphis beating Purdue. I'm afraid we're just going to get no value if this matchup actually comes to fruition. It's going to be like Memphis -1. But yeah, they can give Purdue, their physicality and their post D can give Purdue a lot of issues, especially those young guards. Painter might have to go to that more physical veteran lineup as he had to do against Rutgers when those young, raw guards who are going to be good, but they're just really small. They just were struggling with Rutgers' physicality. Memphis can bring the same with an actual offense that Rutgers doesn't have. So, yeah, I agree that Purdue that's the one team that any of the 1 seeds didn't want to face in Memphis. They're peaking at the right time, super athletic, long, and they can make a deep run here. I'm also going to agree with what Anthony said about Montana State. I think that they can give Kansas State, I think it's a bit overseeded. Look, they have great guards. Noel's been great all year, and Johnson, but they've been a different team away from home. I mean, at home, they were amazing this year. Their home court advantage was through the roof. Place was packed, and they were just great there, but away from home, a little more average. And I also think this is just a good matchup for Montana State. One of those teams that I don't think will get enough love as a potential sleeper. You'll hear about the Furmans of the world, the Drakes, but Montana State's a good veteran team. And look, they can't shoot the 3, but that's one of Kansas State's strengths, I should say, is defending the 3. So you kind of throw that out the window here. Montana State also has really good individual defenders to match up with those Kansas State guards, including Darius Brown, who was the Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year. And what does Montana State have to do on offense? Well, they want to get to the rim and they want to get to the line, and you can do both of those things against Kansas State. So, yeah, I think Montana State is live here, especially against the number.
Yeah, Kansas State 8th worst in the country according to Haslametrics away from home. So definitely a flawed team, and go Bobs. love Danny Sprinkle. So
I think we also I agree with Stuckey. We got to, put a little steam behind Purdue. Not a Boilermaker reference, or maybe it is there. But they're definitely the number one team in this bracket in terms of their school nickname also being a cocktail. So Boilermakers absolutely top of the bracket. Everyone's in love with them. Let's not get carried away from a market perspective. Outside of that, let me throw something out here for an upset in this region. What are your thoughts on Louisiana upsetting Tennessee outright? I know that Tennessee did not set the world on fire offensively. They're without their point guard now, and they're up against a really strong offensive rebounding team, one of the best mid-majors in all of college basketball, 28th in offensive rebounding percentage. And from a star takeover perspective, I know in most cases it's a guard who catches fire, scores 30 or 40, but Jordan Brown, their 6'11" big, has been fantastic down the stretch. He averages 20 and 9. And he dropped 20 on Texas this year. So we have a little, apples to apples comparison of what it's going to be like playing up in terms of competition. They opened, I believe, as a 14-point favorite. I think there's a chance that Tennessee overlooks them, and I kind of like the Raging Cajuns here.
We've been talking about Tennessee's shooting regression. Nobody made any shots against them all year. I think they were the number one defense in the country against unguarded shots. So if anybody can make a three against Tennessee, then they'll have a shot. But I do agree. They're a good shooting team. They don't take a ton of shots, though. They go to the rim a lot. So I think that's a potential problem against Tennessee, which they still are an elite defense, even though, no Ziegler and fading Rick Barnes in March is another profitable trend. So definitely will be an interesting matchup, as well as the 5-12, which is probably the most hyped first-round matchup in years.
So many good nuggets you guys are throwing out. So we've gone through every region at this point, as promised. Let's get to some Cinderella picks now. We want to leave you guys with those. So if you're going to give us a team, 12 seed or higher, that can make it to the Sweet 16, Anthony, who do you think will be this year's St. Peter's?
I don't know that there's a 15, although I didn't think St. Peter's would even beat Kentucky or even come close to beating Kentucky, so I guess we were all wrong on that one. But I think it's Furman, and not just because, we've talked about Furman's matchup in the first round against Virginia and Virginia being flawed. I think it's their second round potential with San Diego State or Charleston, two teams that I was looking to also bet against coming into this tournament, two teams that I'm definitely lower on. That would leave them with the potential to win 2 games, and their style is different. They can run. If they got a matchup with Charleston, they could get up and down with them. San Diego State struggles, to score in the half court. So, there are flaws in those other teams. And so I think Furman is the team that I would probably back, if not, then the team that Stuckey's about to talk about.
And that is, Stuckey?
Yeah, we're going with Drake. I think, Mike, you mentioned this, the Bulldogs off the top of the show. Oldest team by age in the country. One of their guards, Penn, was starting at Siena in 2017. That's how much experience this team has. They haven't been healthy going into March the past couple of years. They are now. They're peaking at the right time. This is an experienced team. I had them circled as my Cinderella going into the tournament before the bracket came out, and I was tweeting about this the other week. I said, give me one of the ACC teams, and that's who they got. And then, look, Indiana got a really tough matchup in the first round against Kent State. So Indiana could easily go down in the first round as well. There could be chaos right there. It could be one of those, 12. You have every year you seem to have one where it's 12 versus 13 in the second round. Wouldn't be surprised if this is it, but I like Drake to make the Sweet 16.
All right, Calabrese, send us off with one more Cinderella pick.
So every year there's a team that wins their conference tournament at the Power 6 level, and everyone gets swept off their feet. This team's going to the national championship. To me this year, that team is Duke, and that means I'm lining up with Oral Roberts as the 12th seed. They've done it before with Asmus. He's put the team on his back. They've outscored teams on their way to the Sweet 16. That's not just what they're going to do this time around, though. They've worked their way into the top 75 in terms of overall defensive efficiency, and a big part of that is Connor Vanover, who is an Arkansas transfer. He's 7'3". He averages 3.3 blocks per game, which is second nationally. So it's not going to be a cakewalk for the Blue Devils, and if Asmus goes, full hero mode and scores 40 points, I could see them not only winning that game, but then obviously everyone has Louisiana upsetting Tennessee, beating Louisiana onto the Sweet 16.
Meanwhile, Anthony you were telling me you were kind of leaning Duke maybe potentially to win it all.
I think Duke either loses to Oral Roberts or I think they're going to make the Final Four.
One or the other.
Yeah, I mean, we talked. Don't love Tennessee. Purdue's vulnerable. Memphis is putting it together, but still inconsistent. Then the bottom half of that region is pretty weak. So like Duke is going to be probably the most popular non-Purdue Final Four pick amongst your bracket pools.
And one final thing about Duke, if they get into a point in the game where they start to feel comfortable, they're up 12, 13 points, Oral Roberts leads the nation in kill shots, which are runs of 10-0 or more. So they're never out of any game. And because of that, I think a Duke team looking to the sideline, not having Coach K there, not having the same kind of consistency, do they panic? I'm betting that they do.
Okay, look, if you aren't prepared at this point after watching this show to fill out a bracket, I don't know what to tell you because our experts have done such an amazing job. And remember, Bet365 is offering a bracket challenge where customers will play for points in each round and the overall winner will get $100,000. Anyone who predicts a perfect bracket will win $10 million. So head to actionnetwork.com/bracket to enter. And that's going to do it for Road to the Final Score presented by Bet365. We're going to have way more March Madness coverage throughout the week on the Action app. On the YouTube channel, we'll have a special Cinderella draft Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Also, go to Action Network HQ on Twitter. Reply to our Bet365 bracket challenge tweet with a screenshot showing you joined the challenge. And you could win this lovely t-shirt. So make sure you go and do that. For Anthony Dabbundo, Mike Calabrese, Stuckey, and Nick Giffen, I'm Maria Marino. Thanks for hanging with us here on Action Network. We will see you next time. Enjoy March Madness.